At the age of 30, Lucas opened the door to a familiar yet distant presence, his parents. They arrived, expecting the same old favors, the same old gratitude for the sacrifices they claimed to have made. But Lucas had other plans. With a sly smile, he handed them a gift wrapped in secrecy. The box they opened was empty. Or so they thought. What they didn't realize was that the true gift was the destruction of their entire empire, a gift they had no idea was coming, but they weren't prepared for the consequences of their own greed. If you've ever felt like a pawn in your family's game, you won't want to miss this. Like, comment, and subscribe to join the conversation and stay updated on more shocking stories of toxic parents and revenge. Don't let their lies go unchallenged. Lucas had always been the golden child. As a young boy, he was showered with praise and affection. He was his parents' pride and joy, their ticket to the good life. But all that changed the day his younger brother Max was born. From that moment on, Lucas went from being the center of attention to just another pawn in his parents' grand financial game. They became distant and manipulative, with their love for him replaced by cold calculations. They used him, signed him up for debts without his knowledge, leveraged his name for loans, and trapped him in a web of lies. Yet, Lucas was too naive to see it at first. He thought it was just part of the deal of being a responsible eldest child. The reality set in slowly. As he grew older, he started seeing the cracks in their facade. His parents, once loving and caring, had turned into selfish, entitled people, only caring about their own comfort and image. Lucas was their tool, and they made sure he knew it. Fast forward to his 30th birthday. As Lucas stood alone in his modest home, he was preparing for the same annual show of gratitude they always demanded, his parents arriving, expecting a grand gesture, a new car, a check for a vacation, whatever it took to keep the illusion alive. They arrived as usual, with their expectations high, looking at him as if he were still the naive boy who didn't know better. But Lucas had prepared something different this time. He wasn't that boy anymore. And today, the gift he had prepared for them wasn't wrapped in ribbons and bows. It was wrapped in power. When his parents arrived, they were met with a simple, small box. No grand decorations, no fancy wrapping, just a plain box. His father, ever so eager for the gift, tore it open, thinking it was just another material object to add to his ever-growing collection. What he found inside was far more valuable than anything he could have imagined. Inside the box were documents, papers that would change everything. The first was a property relinquishment. His parents had no idea, but Lucas had quietly transferred all the assets they'd taken from him, stripping them of their wealth without them ever knowing. The second document was a financial fraud report, evidence of the debts they had put under his name, the lies they had told, and the manipulation they had executed. The third document was a filed complaint to the authorities, exposing their illegal dealings. His parents stared at the papers in disbelief as the truth hit them like a freight train. They had no power left, no leverage, no hold over their son. Everything they had built on his back had vanished, and all they had in their hands now was a box, an empty box that would forever be a reminder of their own greed. Lucas stood there, a calm smile on his face, as his parents, once proud and powerful, now found themselves standing in the ruins of the empire they had so carefully constructed at his expense. What they hadn't realized all these years was that Lucas wasn't invisible. He wasn't the child they could use and discard. And now they were about to pay the price for every mistake they made. The breaking point. A shift in the game. For years, Lucas had tried to live up to the image his parents had painted for him. As their golden child, he was expected to be perfect, to follow the rules, to provide, without ever asking for anything in return. He gave everything, his time, his trust, his hard work. But all he ever got in return was manipulation and control. His parents, once loving and protective, had turned into the architects of his suffocating cage, using guilt, debt, and responsibility to keep him chained. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when Lucas genuinely believed that his parents' expectations were a sign of their love. But over the years, the manipulation grew subtler, more refined. At first, it was just small things. A suggestion to sign a loan for the family business, a request to co-sign a credit card to help out. Lucas didn't question them. After all, they were his parents. They had always been there, right? But as time went on, the requests became demands. Then came the betrayals. They used his good name and his willingness to help, sinking him deeper into debt. He worked long hours, sacrificing his personal dreams to help their business ventures, only to find that they were secretly pocketing the profits, leaving him to pay off their mistakes. It wasn't until Lucas turned 28 that the fog started to clear. He had always trusted that his parents were doing what was best for him, that their love was genuine. But then the realization struck him like a slap in the face. He had been their tool all along. They saw him as nothing more than a source of income, a means to fuel their own lifestyle. They never cared about his well-being. And the worst part? They never planned to let him go. It was one particular night that broke the camel's back. Lucas had just returned home after a grueling day at work. His mind was heavy with the weight of his responsibilities, the debts, the loans, the expectations. It was all too much. He had never felt so alone. The thought of his parents, sitting comfortably in their lavish home, using his name to stay afloat, twisted his stomach. That evening, his parents called. They asked him to come over for dinner, claiming it was to celebrate his recent promotion. Lucas was exhausted, mentally and physically drained, but he agreed to go. Little did he know, this dinner would be the night everything changed. As soon as he walked through the door, he could feel the tension in the air. His mother sat at the table, her face perfectly composed, as always. His father, on the other hand, seemed unusually jovial, his smile almost too wide, too forced. They greeted him with exaggerated enthusiasm, as if nothing had changed, as if they hadn't already drained him of everything he had. "What's the occasion?" Lucas asked, trying to mask his weariness with a smile. His father clapped him on the back. "Just a little something to celebrate your success, son," he said, his voice smooth, like the silk of a con artist's pitch. Lucas sat down, trying to play along, but the gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach wouldn't go away. Something was off. As they ate, his parents talked about their latest business ventures, subtly dropping hints about the financial trouble they were in. The tone was always casual, never serious, but Lucas could sense it. Their words were a veiled plea for help. Yet even in their desperation, they never once acknowledged the fact that they had used him as their personal financial safety net. It was then that Lucas decided to confront them. "I can't keep doing this," he said suddenly, his voice steady but resolute. His mother raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "What do you mean, dear? You've always been so reliable." "That's the problem," Lucas replied, his heart racing. "I've always been reliable. I've always done what you asked. I've always been there, even when it cost me everything. But you—" He paused, collecting his thoughts. "You've used me, and I'm done." For the first time in years, Lucas saw his parents' masks slip. His father's jovial demeanor faltered, and his mother's poised expression cracked, just for a moment. It was subtle, but it was enough. "You ungrateful son," his father growled, his voice suddenly dark. "After everything we've done for you, you dare talk to us like this?" Lucas felt a cold rush of anger fill him. His parents were so accustomed to being in control, so accustomed to manipulating him into submission, that they didn't know how to react when he pushed back. But Lucas wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't the naive boy they had known. He had spent years building a life for himself, away from their grip, and now he was ready to tear it all down. "I've spent my whole life giving you everything, and you've taken it all," Lucas said, his voice cold but firm. "You've stolen my freedom, my happiness, and my peace of mind. But that ends tonight." The shock on his parents' faces was almost comical. They had never seen this side of him before. They had always expected Lucas to be the obedient son, the one who would always bail them out, the one who would take the fall for their mistakes. But now they saw him for what he truly was, a man who had had enough. "I'm taking everything back," Lucas continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "Everything you've stolen from me. You've used me for too long, and now you'll pay the price." And just like that, Lucas made the decision that would change everything. He was no longer the child they could control. He was the man who would take back his life, his power, and his dignity. The beginning of the end. After Lucas left his parents' house that night, a quiet determination settled over him. He had confronted them, exposed the truth, and now it was time to finish what he had started. No longer was he the vulnerable son caught in their web of lies. He had seen through the illusion they had created for so many years, and he was ready to tear it down. For the first time in his life, Lucas truly understood the power he held over his own fate. He wasn't just a pawn in their game anymore, he was the one calling the shots. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. But what would he do next? The first step was clear. He needed to take back control of his life. The financial documents in the box were only the beginning. Lucas needed to act swiftly to dismantle the empire his parents had built on his back. The property relinquishments were already in motion, but there were more layers to peel back, more truths to expose. His parents had used his name to secure loans, sign off on shady deals, and manipulate the financial system in their favor. It was time to reverse all of that. Lucas knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed allies, people who could help him untangle the mess his parents had created. So he reached out to a trusted lawyer, someone who had been a distant acquaintance, but had always been discreet and reliable. Lucas shared everything: the loans, the fraud, the manipulations. Together, they devised a plan to slowly strip away his parents' financial security, starting with the properties they had illegally tied to his name. The lawyer, a sharp and meticulous woman named Karen, was eager to help. "We'll start with the assets," she said, her voice steady as she reviewed the documents. "They can't hide behind your name forever. We'll go through every account, every contract, and every transaction. We'll make sure they pay for what they've done." Karen was no stranger to handling cases of financial fraud. But Lucas's case was different. His parents had been clever, sly in how they used him. They had made sure to cover their tracks, using his name only when it was convenient for them, but leaving him out of the loop when things went south. The more Karen dug into the files, the clearer it became. His parents had manipulated the system with alarming precision. They had used Lucas as their financial shield for years, hiding their messes behind his clean reputation. But it was all about to come crashing down. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategic moves. Each day, Lucas felt the weight of his parents' control loosening. The first major breakthrough came when Karen managed to freeze one of the accounts that had been fraudulently tied to Lucas's name. With one swift legal maneuver, his parents lost access to a portion of their funds. It was just the beginning, but it was a victory that sent a shockwave through their operation. Lucas knew that they would fight back. His parents were resourceful and ruthless. They wouldn't go down without a fight, and they would be furious when they realized what was happening. But Lucas was no longer afraid of their anger. He had lived in their shadow for far too long. Now, it was their turn to face the consequences. In the meantime, he took other steps to secure his position. He began documenting every move his parents made, compiling a dossier of their financial crimes. He had already secured their property titles and hidden key assets in a separate account. But Lucas knew it wasn't enough. He needed more ammunition, more leverage. The documents in the box were just the first part of his plan. The next phase was to publicly expose his parents for the frauds they were. It wasn't just about taking back his life. It was about making them pay for every lie, every betrayal. Lucas wasn't simply going to let them walk away from this without consequences. The media would be his weapon. He knew that if he could expose them in the right way, Their reputations, everything they had built, would crumble. He had the documents, the proof, and now it was time to make sure the world saw them for what they truly were. Lucas didn't feel any hesitation. No guilt. Not anymore. His parents had done worse to him. They had taken away his freedom, his peace, and now they were going to pay for it. They had stolen from him for years, and now he was going to take it all back, by any means necessary. But as the plan moved forward, Lucas knew that the most delicate part of his strategy was yet to come. The final blow, the moment when his parents would finally realize just how far he had gone. The game shifts, the first signs of their fall. As weeks passed, the pieces of Lucas's plan fell into place. The pressure he had started applying on his parents was starting to show, and Lucas couldn't help but feel a thrill as he watched it all unfold. Their empire was built on lies and manipulation, and now those lies were crumbling, one layer at a time. The first real sign that his parents were beginning to panic came when his father, once a pillar of control, called Lucas out of the blue. His voice was tight, controlled, but Lucas could hear the undertone of fear that his father was trying so desperately to mask. "You think you can take everything from us, don't you?" His father's voice crackled through the phone. "We built this life from the ground up, and you—" "I didn't take anything from you, Dad," Lucas interrupted, his voice steady. "You took it from me. You took my future, my peace of mind, and you used me like a tool. This is just me taking it all back." There was a pause. Then his father's voice shifted to something darker, more threatening. "You'll regret this, son. You can't bring us down. We'll fight you every step of the way." It was a warning, but Lucas didn't flinch. He had expected it. The true power behind his parents' empire wasn't just financial, it was their ability to control people. They had done it for years, twisting everyone to their will, manipulating situations to their advantage. But now, for the first time, Lucas was the one holding the strings. In the following days, Lucas saw firsthand the way his parents reacted to the tightening noose around their necks. They were scrambling, desperate, angry, and above all, terrified. The accounts they thought they had full control over were suddenly frozen. Property titles they had thought were safe were now in question, and the fraud investigation, though still under the radar, was gaining momentum. Their world was beginning to implode, and Lucas could feel their frustration as they realized their power was slipping away. What made this even more satisfying was that, through all this turmoil, Lucas remained calm and collected. His every move was calculated. He watched from the sidelines as his parents grew more frantic with each passing day. They called lawyers, tried to reverse the financial maneuvers Lucas had made, and even attempted to manipulate the people around them. But it was too late. The evidence was in place. The walls were closing in. The most gratifying moment came when Lucas received an anonymous tip-off about his parents' shady dealings, how they had forged signatures, hid assets under false names, and bribed officials to cover their tracks. This was it, the smoking gun. Lucas sent the evidence to the authorities and made sure that every key player in their scam would be exposed. As the police started to investigate, the final straw came. His parents, once untouchable, were now being scrutinized by the authorities. The fallout was immediate. Their friends turned away from them. Their business partners distanced themselves. The life they had built on deception and lies was unraveling faster than they could have ever imagined. And the most satisfying part? Lucas was at the center of it all, pulling the strings, watching as his parents finally felt the weight of the lies they had lived. Lucas didn't feel sorry for them, not for a second. His entire life, they had used him as a scapegoat, as a tool to prop up their image. They had discarded him, turned their backs on him, and now they were facing the consequences of their greed and manipulation. For the first time, he was free from their grip, free from their expectations, and free from the constant weight of their lies. The look on their faces when they realized it was all slipping away. Lucas couldn't have asked for a better moment. Their empire was falling apart, and it was all thanks to him. If you've ever dreamt of exposing the truth, hit like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of revenge against toxic parents. The calm before the storm. The final confrontation. Lucas knew that the moment of truth was drawing near. His parents, once untouchable in their world of manipulation and deceit, were now on the brink of losing everything. Their empire, built on lies, financial fraud, and control, was teetering on the edge of collapse. The authorities were closing in, and soon, the entire world would know the extent of their greed and cruelty. But Lucas had been preparing for this day for months. This wasn't just about getting revenge, it was about exposing the people who had betrayed him and taken so much from him. He had spent years being their scapegoat, their pawn in their endless game of power. Now, he was the one holding all the cards. The last phase of his plan was near, and Lucas was ready to make his parents face the full consequences of their actions. He had already secured the financial documents, gathered evidence, and worked with his lawyer to ensure that everything was legally sound. The media would soon be involved, and when it hit, the impact would be devastating. But before the world saw their downfall, Lucas had to face his parents one last time. It was time for the final confrontation. For days leading up to the meeting, Lucas felt a calmness wash over him. He wasn't nervous. There was no fear in him. The anxiety he once felt about disappointing his parents, about letting them down, was gone. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about justice. The truth would finally be exposed, and no amount of manipulation or threats would stop it. He arranged to meet his parents at the family estate, the place where they had always held the power. It was the symbol of their dominance, their wealth, and their control over him. But now, it was nothing more than a house of cards waiting to fall. He had already informed his lawyer and arranged for all the necessary documents and evidence to be ready for when the truth came out. As he drove to the estate, a sense of finality filled him. He was walking into the lion's den, but this time, he wasn't the prey. He was the one holding the weapon, and he had the power to destroy everything they had worked for. The meeting was set for the evening. His parents, no doubt, were expecting to continue the charade. They thought that this was just another one of their usual family dinners, where they could continue to manipulate Lucas into doing their bidding. But this time, it would be different. When he arrived at the estate, his parents greeted him with that same false cheer they always used when they were pretending everything was fine. His father, always the first to speak, tried to mask his nervousness with a forced smile. "Lucas, we're so glad you could make it," he said, his voice strained. "We've been meaning to talk." Lucas didn't smile. He didn't respond to their usual pleasantries. He wasn't there to discuss trivial matters. This wasn't about small talk. This was about the truth, and it was time for his parents to hear it. "I think it's time we had a real conversation," Lucas said, his voice steady but firm. "The truth is, you've lied to me for years. You've used me, manipulated me, and made me your financial shield, and I'm done letting you get away with it." His mother, who had always been the more composed of the two, faltered. For a moment, Lucas saw something in her eyes, fear, maybe, or guilt, but it quickly faded as she regained control. "What are you talking about, Lucas?" she asked, her voice sharp. "We've always done what's best for you." "Best for me?" Lucas scoffed. "You've taken everything from me. My future, my peace of mind, my happiness. I've spent my life living in your shadow, doing everything you wanted, and now I'm paying the price for your greed." His father's face turned red with anger. "You ungrateful child," he spat. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Lucas didn't flinch. He was prepared for this. He had spent so many years listening to their manipulation and lies that now the words didn't have the power they once did. "You've never done anything for me," he replied coldly. "You've only done things for yourselves, using me to further your own interests. But now, it's over." His parents' expressions shifted from anger to confusion. They didn't understand. They couldn't fathom that their golden child, the son they had molded to serve their needs, had finally seen through the illusion. "I've already contacted the authorities," Lucas continued, his voice cold and steady. "Everything you've done, every lie, every fraudulent loan, every property you've stolen, it's all being exposed. You won't get away with it. Not this time." His father's eyes widened in shock. His mother's face drained of color. It was clear. They didn't know the full extent of Lucas's actions. They had underestimated him. They thought they could control him forever, but now they were facing the consequences of their own arrogance. The silence in the room was deafening. His parents stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. They had always been the ones in control, the ones who made the rules. But now, for the first time, they were the ones caught in the web of their own making. The moment of truth. Their empire crumbles. The silence that followed Lucas's words was deafening, like a heavy weight pressing down on the room. His parents, who had once been the architects of his misery, now stood before him, utterly powerless for the first time in their lives. Their masks of control, the ones they had worn so expertly for years, were shattered. The truth, the reality they had fought so hard to bury, was now staring them in the face. His father, unable to hide his fury any longer, slammed his fist down on the table. "You think you can destroy us? You think the world will believe your lies?" he spat, his eyes wild with rage. Lucas didn't flinch. His mind was clear, focused. He knew that this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when his parents would be exposed for the toxic, manipulative people they truly were. "Lies?" Lucas said, his voice cold, cutting through the tension like a knife. "The only lies are the ones you've been telling yourselves. For years, you've used me as your shield. You've manipulated me, forced me into your web of deceit, and now you want to turn it around on me? No, it's time for the truth." His mother, who had been quietly trying to regain her composure, finally spoke, her voice trembling. "You're being unreasonable. This isn't you. We did everything for you. We gave you everything." "Everything?" Lucas laughed bitterly. "What you gave me was a life built on guilt and lies. You took everything from me. My childhood, my dreams, my freedom. You thought you could control me forever, didn't you? But now, I'm taking it all back." The weight of his words seemed to hit them all at once. His mother's face paled as the full extent of Lucas's actions began to sink in. His father, still seething, stood up and paced around the room, unable to find a way to regain control. "I'm not the son you wanted," Lucas continued, his voice unwavering. "You made me a tool. You thought I would be your puppet forever, but I'm not your puppet anymore. And the world is going to see you for what you truly are. A couple of toxic, selfish people who used your son to feed your own egos." At that moment, Lucas stepped forward, handing them a thick folder of documents. It was the final piece of his strategy, the culmination of months of planning. His parents stared at the folder in disbelief, their eyes darting back and forth between him and the papers that would expose everything. "You don't have to do this," his father pleaded, his voice cracking for the first time. "We're family." "Family?" Lucas's words were filled with disdain. "You don't know what that word means. You've broken every bond, every trust. You've destroyed our family long ago, all for your own gain." With that, Lucas opened the folder and laid out the evidence. The papers showed everything: the forged signatures, the fraudulent loans, the bank transactions hidden under his name. Each page was a damning piece of proof, and as his parents looked at it, the truth became undeniable. But the real moment of exposure came when Lucas handed them the final document, a public exposé ready to be sent to the press. It was the story of their deceit, their greed, and their complete disregard for him as a person. It was the truth, and it was about to be unleashed on the world. His father's face twisted in a mix of horror and disbelief. You can't, you wouldn't destroy us like this." Lucas stood tall, his voice firm. "I didn't destroy anything. You did. You've been destroying everything for years. Now it's my turn to rebuild." And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving his parents standing amidst the ruins of their own empire. The next day, Lucas made sure the story hit the press. The media went wild. His parents' names were dragged through the mud as the truth came to light. The financial fraud, the manipulation, and the way they had used him for years. It was all there for the world to see. Their reputation was ruined. The businesses they had built crumbled, and the people who had once admired them now turned their backs. As for Lucas, he was free. He had done what he set out to do. The weight of his past was lifted, and for the first time in his life, he could breathe. His parents, once the powerful figures who controlled his every move, were now nothing more than a cautionary tale, a story of greed, deception, and the toxic nature of family manipulation. And Lucas was the one who had exposed it all. The new beginning. Reclaiming his life. The aftermath of Lucas's actions hit his parents like a freight train. The world had finally seen them for who they truly were: manipulative, toxic, and greedy. Their business empire was in ruins, their reputations shattered beyond repair. The public backlash was immediate and unforgiving. It wasn't just their financial assets that were stripped away. Their social standing, the very foundation of the life they had built on lies, was now gone. Lucas, on the other hand, felt a weight lift off his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying for so long. For the first time in years, he could finally breathe, unfettered by the control his parents had exerted over him. He was free from their grasp, free from the suffocating guilt they had instilled in him. But this freedom came with a new sense of responsibility. Responsibility to himself, to rebuild his life, and to define his future on his own terms. The first few weeks after the fallout were strange. Lucas felt like a man emerging from the darkness, unsure of what awaited him in the light. His life had always been dictated by his parents' expectations and their toxic grip. Now, he had to figure out who he truly was, outside of the image they had created for him. It wasn't easy. The trauma, the years of manipulation, couldn't just be wiped away overnight. But Lucas was determined. He sought therapy, began to explore hobbies he had abandoned years ago, and slowly started to rebuild his self-esteem. For so long, he had been conditioned to believe that his worth was tied to his parents' approval. Now, he was learning that his worth came from within. The support he had been denied all his life began to come from unexpected places. Friends who had once distanced themselves, not wanting to get involved in the family drama, began to reach out. They saw him for the man he had become, not the obedient son his parents had molded him to be. They saw strength in him, and that was something Lucas had never fully understood until now. But the real change came from within. As the weeks turned into months, Lucas found himself rediscovering his passions, his love for writing, his interest in art, and his deep desire to help others who had experienced the same toxic, controlling environment he had been trapped in. He began volunteering at a local support group for those affected by toxic family dynamics, offering a listening ear to others who had been manipulated and betrayed by the ones they loved. He also took control of his finances, slowly but surely paying off the debts that had once been his parents' burden, now his to bear. But this time, he wasn't doing it out of obligation. He was doing it for himself. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. And the weight of his past no longer defined him. As for his parents, the consequences they faced were just the beginning. Their lives had been completely upended. The investigation into their financial crimes continued, and the press didn't let up. Their once glamorous social circles faded into the background as their former allies abandoned them. No longer were they seen as the power couple they had once been. Instead, they were pariahs, their every move scrutinized by the public they had once manipulated so easily. Lucas didn't take pleasure in their downfall, not anymore. He had already won. His victory wasn't in their destruction, it was in his own transformation. He had taken back his life. He had faced his demons, exposed the truth, and come out the other side stronger. His parents had their consequences, But Lucas had his freedom, and that was all he had ever wanted. In the quiet moments, when Lucas found himself reflecting on everything he had been through, he realized something profound. The revenge, the anger, the years of feeling trapped, it had all served a purpose. But in the end, it was his ability to rebuild, to heal, and to move forward that mattered most. He had broken free, and in doing so, he had become the person he was always meant to be, strong, independent, and unapologetically himself. As he stood on the edge of his new life, Lucas smiled to himself. The past was behind him, and the future was his to shape. No longer would he live in the shadow of his toxic parents. He had reclaimed his life, and that, more than anything, was his true victory. Healing. The road to true freedom. Months passed, and the pain of Lucas's past slowly began to fade. The initial rush of revenge, the satisfaction of watching his parents face the consequences of their actions, had been powerful. But as time went on, Lucas came to realize that true freedom wasn't just about watching his parents crumble. It was about the peace he had to find within himself. He had spent so many years under the thumb of toxic control, always questioning his worth, always second-guessing his decisions. But now, with the weight of his parents' manipulation finally lifted, Lucas was learning to trust himself. The journey was far from over. He still had scars, deep emotional wounds from a childhood stolen, a young adulthood filled with deceit, but he was on the road to healing. Lucas knew that healing didn't happen overnight. It wasn't as simple as cutting ties with his parents and walking away. No, the scars they had left were deeper than that, woven into his very understanding of what love and family meant. For so long, he had believed that his worth was defined by how much his parents demanded from him, by how much he could sacrifice for them. Their love had always been conditional, wrapped in guilt and manipulation, and for a long time, he thought that was the only kind of love that existed. But now, he was learning to love himself, and that was the most important lesson of all. The therapy sessions continued, a safe space where Lucas could unravel the tangled threads of his past. He talked about the guilt he felt for not meeting his parents' expectations, the anger he had suppressed for so many years. He realized that it wasn't his fault. He hadn't chosen to be their pawn, but for too long, he had allowed himself to be manipulated. The anger, the resentment, it was all a result of years of being made to feel small, insignificant. Through healing, Lucas began to understand that the key to moving forward was forgiveness. Not for his parents, they hadn't earned it, but for himself. He needed to forgive himself for the years he spent trapped in their web of lies, for the parts of him he had abandoned in order to keep them happy. He needed to stop seeing himself as a victim of their abuse and start seeing himself as a survivor. And so, little by little, Lucas rebuilt. Not just his life, but his sense of self-worth. He took small steps, taking a trip to a place he had always wanted to visit, reconnecting with old friends who had always supported him, and starting projects that fueled his passions. He began to invest in himself, in his future, and most importantly, in his happiness. The road wasn't without its bumps. There were days when the past would come rushing back, when the wounds would flare up, and when Lucas would question his decisions. But on those days, he reminded himself that healing was a journey, not a destination. It was okay to have setbacks. It was okay to still feel pain. What mattered was that he was moving forward, not backward. One day, as Lucas sat in his favorite park, a place he frequented to clear his mind, he realized something important. He had spent so much time focusing on what his parents had taken from him, on the betrayal they had inflicted, that he had forgotten to appreciate the strength he had found within himself. His parents had tried to break him, to control him, but in the end, they had unknowingly forged a resilience in him that he had never known he possessed. Lucas understood now that the lesson wasn't in the revenge he had taken, it was in the growth that had followed. It was in finding the courage to walk away from the toxic relationships that had defined his life for so long, and in the process, reclaiming his own narrative. As he stood up from the park bench, a sense of calm washed over him. The past was behind him, and his future was his to shape. He didn't need his parents' approval to live the life he had always dreamed of. He had everything he needed inside himself. Lucas smiled, knowing that while the scars of the past would never fully disappear, they no longer had the power to define him. The lessons had been hard-won, but they had made him who he was today, a man who was no longer bound by the toxic grip of the past, a man who had finally learned to heal. And in that healing, he found the greatest victory of all, the freedom to live on his own terms, to choose his own path, and to be the person he was always meant to be.